So that's the background, and that's how we got here today. And myself and Amy will be available for any questions.
Very good, thank you. And next up, the homeowner, Kyle Bell, will have his time to present. Good morning. Do you need a copy of this?
No, I'm here. I'll watch.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Please.
My name is Kyle Bell. Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. I want to start with former Commissioner Salzman's Chief of Staff, Matt Brown. And Envoy Sergeant Margie Solinger confirmed that Portland citizens do in fact have the right to decide about appeal before the mayor and council, so I appreciate it. This forum should be considered my appeal. This is my first and only appeal. It's been stated previously by PBOT employees that I already had my appeal, and that simply is not true. I'm going to provide some background context. For years, individual homeowners have been responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the sidewalks and curbs surrounding their home. What is not widely known is the process we go through if a citizen doesn't agree with PBOT's sidewalk assessment. What you'll hear from my experience is a changing of rules, the breaking of their own regulations, omitting work orders, adding new work, cutting corners, and creating what appear to be a series of mistakes that have now been saddled with their multi-$1,000 bill. There are a few things I need to make clear. I'm of course 100% all for safe sidewalks, free of tripping hazards, and I understand the homeowner's responsibility to that. I also completely understand the citizen in this situation has several options, as I've heard in previous times. You can hire your own independent licensed contractor to replace your sidewalks. As a homeowner with a permit, you can work on your own sidewalks. We can allow the city, through their chosen outside contractor, to replace your sidewalks for two to three times the actual cost needed, and then they send you a bill. And last, we have the option to appeal the entire need to have our sidewalks worked on or replaced. The picture, this is a picture of my sidewalks moments, and it's in your packets. It's the very first picture. Moments before my sidewalks were torn up. They were not hazardous. They fit well within the standard of every sidewalk throughout my neighborhood and the entire Portland metro area. There are no trees along my property pushing up the sidewalks, and there are no sinkholes, no tripping hazards whatsoever. Upon receiving the PBOT sidewalk notice, of which I thought was my first, but I've been told was my second, my initial reaction, there was a mistake, and that PBOT was referring to the recently replaced sidewalk panels just up the street from my property. I have a unique easement, and continuing further on up the street, it seemed like the notice simply went to the wrong address. All of these are just pictures of my sidewalk. There are a lot of leaves, but I wasn't particularly concerned at the time, as my neighbor, a retirement center, had already done their repairs, and it simply felt like the city was a little behind on the notice, and they sent it to the wrong person. Not to mention, at this point, there was no actual paint on the sidewalks to describe what was being viewed as non-compliant. In other words, no visuals or an otherwise very normal-looking standard sidewalk, free of tripping hazards and trees. This is a description of the sidewalk that I was just talking about, where it went up my neighbor's. This is kind of highlighting what I was seeing, basically right at the end of my driveway. After receiving the second notice, what I'm told is there's when I took action. I began the process of alerting PBOT of where my property lines were and then where my easement was, and it was from my neighbor's property, and they were sending it to the wrong address. That's when I was able to meet up with a person named Adam Hogan. We arranged a day to get together, and I wanted to show him that I didn't have any, there were no tripping hazards, no trees. So he came to my house, but he immediately walked me around to the front where now things were actually painted out at this point. And there was spray paint. They were sort of outlining these inconsequential imperfections in the concrete. In other words, there was narrow lines. Some of these are built, originally designed expansion seams used to allow concrete to expand and contract with temperature change. And some small cracks. The same kind that exists in every sidewalk everywhere. No tripping hazards, no danger. It was stated in a previous council meeting by PBOT Inspector Mike Zeller that Mr. Bell didn't respond until he was marked out. When he got marked out, he responded to request a final inspection and no work had been done. Mr. Bell came to the last assessment, and that was detailed today by Tara. This is clearly inaccurate. Who would call the final inspection when no work had been done? I called PBOT to my property to show them that I felt like they were alerting the wrong property owner. This is actually a description of what was received when it comes in the mail. It's not all kind of put together. And the difference between looking at that versus that. See, it didn't stand out to me as my sidewalk, particularly before there was any paint or anything. Mr. Hogan was the second person to inspect my sidewalk. The first inspector turned in the original report. There was no alternate fix option to the deal. That wasn't mentioned by Tara today. But it was not discussed at all. There was nothing in the paperwork and no verbal description of minimal repairs that could be done. And the curbs were called out specifically by the original inspector and Mr. Hogan to replace them. Although I thoroughly, wholeheartedly disagree with the hazardous assessment. A lot of talking. Looking to the city of Portland, PBOT properties as examples of compliant sidewalks only uncovered that even the city's properties didn't abide by the very sidewalk rules and regulations by which they enforce. Mr. Hogan informed me my sidewalks were called out most likely because of the neighbor's trees, which Tara also pointed out. They will check the property that's called out and then go down the block and around the corner. And my house is on a corner, so they went on both sides of it. It was recommended I have a contractor come look at my sidewalks, and the contractor that I called came out. He started working up some rough numbers in his head. When I pointed out that I needed to replace the curbs, he stopped and stated, "I don't do curbs. You have to shut down a lane of division, multiple flaggers. Both remove and for both the remove and rebuild, and you'll have to dig down well over a foot when removing the original chunks. It's a big job." Just kind of get to the sidewalk. You can see, I brought this as an example of what a curb looks like that's getting replaced. Eventually, a construction crew paid for by the city showed up unannounced and began tearing out my sidewalks. No warning, no notice. They don't pull a permit. PBOT's not required to. No door hangers before construction. They didn't hang it on that corner. And the corner is barred off, and it is actually a completely different zip code and address on that door. After the sidewalk construction was completed, my final inspected and officially approved, they sent me a non-itemized bill, and there's no idea of what cost what. I informed Lee Munson that his crew had completed work over my 60th Avenue property line. There's this random patch of concrete that was apparently a former bus stop. This wasn't even in the sidewalk, and they claim, they remove it from. The claim was that they removed it from the bill since I pointed it out. But there's no way to know that when you receive this large bill and suddenly they just kind of knock a few $100s off. This is the property line on the other side of my property where I informed them that they also went over that property line. Along the property, if you notice on the, they have a schematic of what sort of work needed to be done. It didn't include, there's these 3 patches of triangles that they've added within my sidewalk where they say they don't do partial square replacements. I've ended up with 3 of these partial square replacements. It's written right on their website that they don't do that. This last one that's pictured right now is actually popping up slightly and it's really become shooting hazard already. And then the final bit. This is actually an old picture of my house from the 70s. They included this hole right here I'm highlighting because they literally were having me redo a small patch of grass around that hole that was put in by a Bell phone system or PGE or something. It was just all like, it felt like there was various areas around my complete house that I was not able to take responsibility for or go beyond my neighbor's property. Get to the point where when you add up not doing the curbs, this was probably the largest stumbling block for me as a homeowner. When you're faced with how are you going to replace these, how are you going to shut down a lane, how flaggers, it becomes a near impossible task. But it's written here, they'll put it down as a $300 item on a bill, and it just really isn't accurate at all.
So just a point of order here. Are you close to the end of your presentation? And if not, what we could do is potentially give you a couple of extra minutes to finish up your arguments, but then I'm going to extend that same courtesy to the Bureau. Is that acceptable to the council?
Yes, Mayor, it is.
I appreciate that. Just as an example, I don't know how to get this to play. Let's see. This is a guy over the top of the frame replacing a curb. This is just me like videoing a random guy replacing a curb. There's this sense, the only reason I show this is because they are giving this sense that curbs were like an easy task. It's the main problem. If a homeowner is told you have to replace the curbs, and then PBOT goes in and decides you don't have to replace the curbs, and they make what they call a field decision, it changes everything. It doesn't become this task that a person the idea of changing patches of concrete one at a time as a homeowner, though not an ideal situation, it is possible. It's squares, it's cutting squares with a saw, it's replacing cement, it's not using another jackhammer in the street, blocking out a lane. This is my new sidewalk. It's already nearly a code violation, which is that ½ inch. This isn't necessarily a process that they have messed up. It's the system of measurement. It's the idea that this ½ inch is what's going to determine compliance or non-compliance. When you have brand new approved sidewalks that are already with only a few chipping hazards going to be non-compliant, it doesn't leave you with much wiggle room with regards to any kind of damage or anything that might occur to it, even just randomly. This is just getting briefly to, I've shown you before, how just up the street, in just looking at neighbors' properties, this is Portland's property. Although a lot of it has been updated, portions of it are not. This is in front of the school. The standard, it feels like a double standard to a citizen. This is the expectation, and it doesn't feel like it's being upheld on a city level. The sidewalk, I would just leave you with this. The sidewalk construction completed in my house by PBOT was not necessary. My sidewalks were not hazardous. The construction process was filled with mistakes, misleading information. There was the omissions, mysterious accountings for billing, and I don't know how they arrived at the final bill for me. I don't feel like I should have to pay for the replacement of my sidewalk. It was neither necessary or done correctly. There's even, most recently, just listening to the last presentation, There's things that just, that didn't happen. Being told that you no repairs was a big one. Getting told that there was things that did happen, being told that you have to replace your curbs and not being allowed to.
Is that the officer that got reinstated?
What?
Very good.
He's the guy on the phone. I think he.
Next up, the Bureau will have
Yeah,
5
different.
minutes to present any rebuttal information. Obviously, Mr. Bell will have an additional 3 minutes, so if they wanted to take a little extra time, that's fine too. Just in the interest of time.
This is pretty good, actually. This is an interesting case.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Thank you.
Looks like it
I
has
don't
law
have too much more to
enforcement.
add.
Yeah.
Other than